Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this SEPS webinar. We just wait a few minutes to allow people to connect before we start. So just a couple of minutes more. Can I ask the speaker to mute yourself, please, until we start with the panel? Thanks. Okay, the number of attendees is growing. Maybe just 1 minute more, and then we start. I think I will start at least to welcome everyone. Good morning and very welcome to this event on poverty, monitoring poverty in the COVID-19 era. We have a super interesting lineup of speakers covering different aspects of this issue. And there are a number of angles that are important when we discuss poverty in the EU in the post-COVID era. Before moving to the discussion and to the introduction of the speakers, allow me to take a few minutes to give a bit of background about this event. This event is basically the concluding meeting of a winter school. We had 2 full days of training with an incredible group of people who participated in a training in a winter school on data methodologies and then data collection, data availability related to poverty and vulnerabilities. Sorry, and this in this winter school is part of an Horizon 2020 project, InGRID-2. For those who are interested, you can find a lot of information on the website of this project. InGRID is a special research project. In fact, this is a research infrastructure. So basically, it's a platform. It's a place where information, knowledge is collected and is made available to the community, to the scientific community in different ways. And in the context of the different activities, we do, of course, research. A lot is focused in getting new data and analyzing new data related to inclusive growth. And the second is also to share the knowledge. And it is in this context that a number of winter, summer, spring schools have been organized. And this one was really the data devoted to data monitoring and poverty. Now, before we move to the discussion, as I said, I would like to, in a way, try to share with you what came out of these 2 days of work. And I will try to do so in 2 ways. First, I will give the floor to my colleague, Sara Baiocco, and ask her to identify what are the main open issues when it comes to data collection, measurement of poverty, and monitoring of poverty. So a number of issues of course, of statistical nature. Some others are maybe related to the identification of the problem. And the second way we will do this is that we had a number of sessions where the participant actually could bring their issues based on the research activities. And we came up with a record of this using drawings. So I will share with you a number of drawings, so visuals, which basically, in a sense, summarize the work that the participants are doing in this topic. So I will now share my screen, and while Sarah explains, I will show you these drawings. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cinzia, and good morning to everybody from my side also. First of all, let me thank you all the participants to the winter school, all the students that took part to our schools, and also the speakers that were with us in the last 2 days, Christopher Lundenberg, Jana Besamuska, and Tina Godem, that actually brought into the school very interesting points and discussion, and made these 2 days very interesting and useful for us. So looking at the key issues that have emerged during these 2 days, both during the discussion following the classes and the keynote speech at the beginning of the school, but also the presentation of the students' own research and the discussion that they had with each other, we have indeed highlighted some open issues that came up quite often. So first, the first issue refers to who is included in the measurement of poverty. So attention should be paid to the sample design, but also particular worries were raised for groups that end up being underrepresented or even totally excluded from data collection, such as homeless people, for example. As one student put it yesterday, referring to a famous quote, what gets counted counts for policy. So it means that in this sense, policy can acknowledge their situation and do something about these groups only if these groups are included in data collection. This aspect is important if we study and we want to act on discrimination and exclusion of these groups particularly. Despite these possible limitations, we have come to the conclusion that is of utmost importance to have an official definition of poverty and an official poverty line to then study the phenomenon and produce estimates of poverty that can be shared and inform policy. It also emerged that indeed the choice of indicators ends up being also a political process, where researchers can nonetheless play a role in helping the selection of the most suitable indicators and definition. However, the discussion also led to point out that it is important to be transparent about the procedures to define this poverty line, this definition of poverty, and also about the procedures to estimate poverty, and to acknowledge and report the possible margins of errors and limitations of these indicators and measurements. Finally, considering the fast evolutions of our society, several interventions and the discussion pointed out to the importance of starting to include in the definition of poverty also new dimensions. For example, digital deprivation, which is especially relevant for children that needs to adapt to digital learning, which has become a very relevant phenomenon during COVID-19, but also other aspects such, for example, nest living and the transition to adulthood. Actually, perfect timing, because this was also the presentation of this research. Also, as I said, also including other dimensions, extended the definition of poverty to new dimensions that are becoming more important. And as a final conclusion, considering all I said about people being excluded from data collection or new dimensions to be included, we also consider that it is very hard to capture the entire situation regarding poverty with one single indicator, and thus it's always possible to define actually a set of interesting indicators that can give a complete picture. I hope I made justice to the content that we discussed during the school, and I hope that the discussion that comes forward can react also on these issues. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sarah. Many thanks for this summary and identifying these open issues. Indeed, some also came out clearly from the keywords appearing in the drawings. I think it was a nice tool also to bring some visuals to the to your presentation. I guess we will put all these available online for those who would be interested actually in looking at these slides again. Okay, I think it's now time to move to the panel discussion. As I said, we have a very interesting and I think complementary lineup of speakers. Let me briefly introduce each of them. We have Rudy Van Dam. Good morning, Rudy, and many thanks for joining us. I'm really glad you can make it. Rudy is currently a policy advisor at the Belgian Ministry for Social Security. He is also a member of the indicator subgroup of the EU Social Protection Committee. He has a very long experience with indicators related to social dimension, I would say in general, both at EU level and national level. So in this sense, I think it can really help us to learn how the institutions, government and EU are looking at this problem. Second speaker, Balint Many-Hert, sorry for the wrong presentation. Balint is a research fellow at the Joint Research Center. This is the European Commission Science and Knowledge Service. Balint is currently working and actually is responsible for a pilot research on measuring absolute poverty in the European Union. I think this is a very interesting research project, and I'd like to invite Balint to share with us what this is about and the concept maybe of absolute poverty, which is central to the project. And then we move to Monica Pratesi. Good morning, Monica. Many thanks for joining us. She's full professor of statistics at the Department of Economics and Management at the University of Pisa. Pisa is a member of the InGRID-2 consortium. We are really glad to have excellent scholars in this network. Monica is a very experienced statistician, so she knows very well the methodological issues and problematic, but she's also working on addressing issues which are very relevant for inclusive growth, but also sustainability. So in this sense, I think she's well placed, and she can help us to see what are the main challenges for methodological challenges for measuring poverty now, given COVID, what COVID is changing, or what additional challenges it's posing to us. And then last but not least, Matthias Maucher is policy officer at the European Anti-Poverty Network. Matthias has long experience in several organizations dealing with, let's say, social issues, monitoring and the evolution of different social elements and problematics, now focusing especially on poverty. And I hope that Matthias can help us also to make a bit the link between maybe the data, the methods, and the problems that we want to address, maybe bringing us also towards policy element, if we can call it like this. SEPS is a think tank. For us, this is a very important dimension. So data collection, analysis, research is much more interesting, at least this is my point of view, when it's actually done to address a problem, a policy problem. And in the case of poverty, this is very clearly the case. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Rudy to open this panel. Rudy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you very much for this very nice introduction and for inviting me to this conference with a team which is very close to my heart, I would say, and my experience. I will try to share my presentation. You can see it like this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So I organized my presentation around the 3 questions you asked. But before going to the first question, very briefly, I would like to situate a bit the work on social indicators in the EU governance pre-COVID period. I can say when we look back to the last decade, which is the decade under the Europe 2020 strategy, I think we can say that social indicators have become to play a more important role in the overall EU governance. And 2 points which are of key importance in that regard, I think, are first, the fact that targets were set under the Europe 2020 strategy on the reduction of poverty and social exclusion. And this clearly enhanced the visibility of the indicators and, of course, also on the problems which they are trying to measure. It enhanced the visibility and, well, in a certain way, to a certain extent, also the accountability, I would say, that they pointed to the fact that we were not completely on scheme in realizing the targets. So this was brought constantly under the attention due to the targets. The increased visibility was also caused by a number of high-level monitoring tools, like the Social Protection Performance Monitor and the Social Scoreboard. And I think tools like this are very important to enhance the visibility and the role of social indicators and poverty indicators, which are an important part of social indicators in the EU governance process. So this just to very briefly situate where we come from when we entered the COVID era, I would say. Now, going to your first question, has the crisis revealed deficiencies in measuring poverty in the EU? Well, in fact, we had a very good, if you allow me to call it like this, exercise 10 years before, during the financial crisis. And the issues which were identified at that time clearly came back now under the COVID crisis period. And I would say the major issue that we identified in our work in the Social Protection Committee and its indicator subgroup, and of course in the wider EU governance process, is the timeliness of our indicators. As you know, and probably you came to that in your discussions in the previous days, our indicators have quite a big time lag between the reference period for the indicators, the period to which they refer, and the current situation. Now, when you look at other also economic indicators, this is not so strange, because also if you look at, for example, the alert mechanism indicators, the scoreboard there, they also have a time lag, but still social indicators have some more bigger time lag. So this was really and still is the key issue in social indicators, social monitoring, the timeliness of the indicators. Also, of course, there are a number of gaps in our monitoring system, and which are always there, but which become more important, more relevant under a severe crisis situation, like we are missing out a number of impacts of the social impacts of the COVID crisis. That is very clear. Let me just refer to the situation of, for instance, very vulnerable groups, which are, might have been very hard hit by the crisis. So we don't capture a lot of aspects. So these are really two major issues that come out of social monitoring as deficiencies of social monitoring under severe crisis situations, I would say. Now, coming to your second question, how has the pandemic impacted on poverty monitoring in the EU? Well, the story is here much the same as with the previous question. After the financial crisis of starting in 2008, let's say, and the years after that, when we were confronted in the indicator subgroup of the Social Protection Committee with the challenges for social monitoring coming out of that, a number of initiatives were taken jointly, mainly with Eurostat, to try to improve the situation, especially regarding the timeliness of our indicators. So, and let me go briefly over a number of these initiatives that have been taken and which have become, again, of course, more relevant now under the COVID crisis. First of all, well, there were different initiatives which have been set up to improve the timeliness back 10 years ago. And the first very important one is the development of a nowcasting capacity by Eurostat and the GRC, based on the Euromod microsimulation model. This is a method of trying to, starting from the indicators as they are, and starting from the period to which they refer, trying to now cast them to the current situation, or as close as possible to the current situation. So this means bridging the, let's say, 2-year gap between the reference period for the indicators and the current situation. So this is what this nowcasting capacity is about. Now, of course, you can imagine that this is technically, methodologically, a very challenging issue. And Eurostat, GRC, together with the Euromod team and the national teams have been working over the past years to develop this capacity. And it is now in a stage that it is listed as an experimental statistic by Eurostat. So we started using it in a prudent way, let's say, because it shows promising results, but we are not completely sure yet about the outcomes. Then another important issue, and I have to hurry a bit, I think, because there's a lot to say about all these issues. Another major initiative is the improved timeliness of the EU SILC data. As you maybe know, there has been a new EU regulation on social statistics, covering the different social surveys like EU SILC, like labor force survey, etc. And for EU SILC, this new regulation also included an enhanced timeliness, an improved timeliness of the delivery of the data by the national institutes to Eurostat, which means also a very much sooner availability of the indicators. Now, this is still in development. The regulation has been agreed. This is in action, but member states have some time to go to that path of a more timely delivery. So we can expect within the coming years that EU SILC data will become available very soon after the year for which they have been collected. So this is the intention that they become available at the end of the year during which they are collected. So this will be a very big improvement when we are there. Another type of action that was taken to improve timeliness of monitoring is the use of some indirect indicators, like the macroeconomic gross household disposable income indicator, which is a national accounts based indicator, which shows the share of the total households of the total income going to households in the economy. Of course, this does not show distributional aspects between households. And another indicator which is used in a bit of a prudent way is the financial distress indicator coming from consumer surveys. Another action that was taken is to use early estimates, specifically for the material and social deprivation indicator, which is made available before the other indicators are available from the EU SILIC survey. So this indicator routinely becomes available in the beginning of the year following the data collection. So usually during February, March, the material and social deprivation indicator is available, whereas the other indicators become only available later in the year. Another step that was taken to improve timely monitoring is that an additional data collection was set up by the member states. So member states started delivering data to the Social Protection Committee to collect an overview of benefit recipients, the evolution of benefit recipients. So the number of unemployment beneficiaries, the number of social assistance beneficiaries, bringing this all together for all the member states also gives a first glimpse of the evolution of the social situation. Of course, this is not standardized data collection. Member states just bring in what they have available, and it gives the intention is to have a rough idea of how the situation evolves within the member states. Now, specifically during the COVID crisis, and due to the fact that almost all member states organized specific crisis support measures like reduced working time benefits and things like that, or allocations for the self-employed, support measures for the self-employed. The SPC, and together with the MCO committee, started also collecting the number of beneficiaries of this crisis support measures. So this is an additional data collection to try to follow up what is happening in the member states in a more timely manner. Now, the result of this monitoring is also in a new report by the SPC and MCO committees on COVID-19 monitoring, and you can find that report on the SPC and I guess also MCO website, because I come from SPC, so I know better the SPC website and the MCO website, but I guess it will be on both websites. Okay, this is, well, the actions that have been taken to improve the timeliness, especially the timeliness of the monitoring of the social situation under the crisis situation. And most of these things were already started up during the financial crisis. Now, in Belgium, very briefly, I think we also set up an increased cooperation between different institutions to bring together all our available data. We are trying to combine administrative data with additional survey data, mainly LFS-based survey data. We're also started using preliminary, non-validated administrative data to be soon to have the data as soon as possible and to have an idea of what is happening on the terrain in society. We also started integrating these different early data to try to assess flows between unemployment, inactivity, social assistance, etc. And we also started cooperating with academic teams also to try to enhance nowcasting on a national level. So a number of initiatives also were taken to improve, improve the monitoring in a severe crisis situation. Now, to finish, the last question: how can poverty monitoring contribute to drive the allocation of funds under the Next Generation EU? Well, here I think the recovery and resilience plans are supposed to be linked with the country-specific recommendations. So this is in the guidance of for the RRPs, for the recovery and resilience plans. They are linked to the CSRs. This means that they should be linked also to a certain evidence base, because the CSRs are to be based on the country reports, which the Commission sends out every year in February, and which contain a detailed analysis of the situation in the member states. Now, these country reports are in the first place based on these common monitoring tools, these common indicators. So this is very important, that the RRPs are to be linked with the CSRs. So if we want to think about how the indicators can play a role in allocating the funds under the Next Generation program, I think what needs to be done is to strengthen the role of social indicators in these monitoring tools, which are on the basis of the country reports and thus on the basis of the CSRs. How can we do that? I think there's still room for improvement. I started my presentation with saying the situation, the role of social indicators has improved under the Europe 2020 strategy, especially under the Juncker Commission. But I think still progress can be made there. The balance of social indicators and employment indicators and other indicators can still be improved, I think. The social indicators, the role of social indicators, the number of social indicators, I think still needs to be improved. There's room for improvement there. And I think there are also still a number of gaps in our monitoring system. So I think we should reflect on ways of covering these gaps in our monitoring system. And I think here, for these issues, the reviewing of the social scoreboard in the upcoming action plan for the social pillar will be an important aspect. So this action plan will be launched next week by the European Commission. I'm very curious about what the proposals will be of the Commission on the social scoreboard, but this will be an important aspect there. And I think also, apart from specifically the monitoring tools, also the joint assessment of the RRPs and their implementation will be important. The joint implementation there, I mean, from the Commission and the member states jointly of these RRPs, and the implementation from a poverty perspective will also be an important issue. And I think we need, and this is a very difficult issue because member states are rather reluctant to start new data collections, etc. So, but we need, I think there is a need to reflect on filling in the gaps in our monitoring capacity. So, and with this, I will end my too long. Apologies for being maybe a bit too long.
Many thanks, Rudy. Many thanks for your presentation. For me, there are two takeaways. So that there is actually an ongoing effort to reduce the time lag in the production of social data. In fact, this came up as an issue during the last 2 days. It was very interesting to the presentation of the different avenues which are now on the table to do so. I find particularly interesting your last point. In fact, the allocation of the funds, so that the main amounts of funds across countries was based on macroeconomic indicators, so not social indicators, but of course the plans on which the national governments have freedom the indication of the Commission is to follow the country-specific recommendations. And it is, I think you are completely right that the availability and the composition of the scoreboard and the indicators to take into account actually can play really a key role in a sense to give more importance to the social indicators. I would like to invite everyone who would like to ask questions based on Rudy's presentation, but also on the following one, simply using the Q&A function. Everyone can find it at the bottom of the screen. There is just a button Q&A. You can just type in your question. We'll collect some and then we will have a discussion. I'm now moving to Balint. Balint, please, the floor is yours. There is, I think there is a problem with the audio. I really cannot hear you. There is just a lot of noise. Balint, can I just ask you maybe to disconnect and then reconnect, and maybe we go with Monica in the meantime, and then we go with your presentation just to avoid to lose too much time. Monica, can you go, please?
Okay. Here we are. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can see
Great. So many thanks for sharing the ideas with me today on this very important issue. And may I go on?
There was also a bit of noise. I don't know. Can you please try again?
Is it okay now?
This voice came when Balint was in again. So that voice came from Balint, unfortunately.
Oh, it came from Balint. So, okay. Starting from the first question, how has the pandemic impacted poverty monitoring in Europe? That's a very important question. According to my point of view, I think that we need to separate two parts of this question. As far as I know, it would be very difficult to answer to the question on how COVID affected inequalities and extreme poverty, extreme income poverty across the world. Maybe on this, we may never know the full answer. And that's because poverty data are drawn from household surveys, and for obvious reasons, now it is, I would say, impossible to conduct proper surveys under conditions in many countries. I'm thinking not to Europe, but to other countries all over the world. Anyway, we know that the strongest drivers of poverty is economic growth, and I think that we are we have better tools in order to measure economic growth. But if the question is on how the COVID affected monitoring of inequalities and extreme income poverty across the world, to this question, I think that we can say something to answer, focusing on the effect on data collection methods and on the statistical tools chosen for the analysis of the data. So just to focus the ideas, I think that we have three main sustainable development goals to take into considerations today. The first one is combating poverty, actions against poverty, reducing inequalities, and also having quality in education. just to fix the ideas and to share with you what happened in Italy, I can say that regarding the first goal, there was a loss of income and poverty increased in all its dimensions. I have no data now for 2020, but I can't disclose them because they have not been published yet, but I can say that we can say what I have just said. For what concerns increase inequality, there are issues related to specific subpopulations groups, that is migrants and refugees. For what concerns instead, I'm sorry about that. For what concerns education, quality in education, this is a big issue because, you know, schools and universities were closed, and for this we had an increase in digital study modes. This seems not have a direct connection with poverty, but instead it has, because distance learning can be less effective and not accessible for everyone. I have seen that in the results obtained from the students of this winter school, there is also an attention to these aspects. So these are the three main sustainable development goals to consider, according to me. And the COVID pandemic had an effect on them. I have summarized the effects we can see now in Italy. Now, if we look at the trend in absolute poverty here, broken down by geographical areas, so you can distinguish northern Italy, central Italy, and other northern Italy, central Italy, and the southern part of Italy, and the general line here refer to the whole country. So here we have values, they stop to 2019, and this trend is important to know because obviously now we have situations where about 1.7 million of households are in absolute poverty. They are more or less equal to an incidence of 6.4%, about 5 million of individuals. So the absolute poverty basket for Italy represents the set of goods or services that in the Italian context and for a family with certain characteristics are considered essential. Essential for a given family to achieve a minimally acceptable standard of living. And on this absolute poverty basket, it is fixed the absolute poverty threshold that represent the minimum expenditure necessary to acquire the goods and services included in the basket of absolute poverty. So this is the main rules governing the behavior of the data you can see in the graph. The absolute poverty threshold varies by construction according to the size of the family, its composition by age, and their geographical distribution and the size of the municipality of residence. So Italian National Statistical Institute has always done a very detailed work to measure absolute poverty. And this detailed work today, in the past year, was possible, but not completely using the same modalities and the same methodologies. I want to base my reasoning on an example because it is easier to communicate to you. So the first question is there a loss of contact with reality? Because this is the issue. To face with the problem of not having the same possibility of doing interviews to the respondents, sample surveys were converted to computer-assisted telephone interviewing or to computer-assisted web interviewing modes. So this was an acceleration towards the smart surveys. And at the same time, there was an additional difficulty because social services in many cases during last year suspended the activities in the sense that they couldn't obviously have a sort of front desk with persons with vulnerabilities and problems. And so this was an issue when considering benefits recipients, and also was an issue when we had to distribute these benefits. So it had an effect on data collection methods, acceleration towards what we call smart surveys, and it identified also new vulnerabilities. These new vulnerabilities are related also to new living standards we want to have in relation with health the access to health services and the access to education facilities. The reactions of statistical systems and of the Italian statistical systems was for concerned surveys to suspend the survey activity at first, then to redefine some aspects of them, especially in data collection, and then also in setting up new surveys. So for what can I say? I see that there was a timely and adequate response to the emergency. But there are some cons, and I think that developing on these cons, we can build a new scenario. So this changing in the current activity to continue measuring poverty had a lack had not a general framework of reference of planning indications, of shared objectives in terms also of knowledge goals in the medium long term. So now we are with the first years of pandemic at our back, and we need to understand how to consolidate this good practice and how to eliminate the bad practice that we used to collect data. And this goes very closely with the effects pandemic had on statistical methods for the analysis of the collected data. So the main question, as Rudy has already underlined, is how far are we going with the usage of model-based estimates? So we are going towards model-based estimates, and for nowcasting, that's an issue, but also simply for having estimates from survey data, because direct estimates, as we call the estimates we can have from survey data, simply from survey data, are accompanied by model-based estimates which can give you the opportunity of having also insights on specific domains you have not planned at the beginning of the survey. And I'm thinking here on the new possible vulnerabilities and on the necessity of having more detailed domains at geographical level, or even imagining cross-classifications of population which are of high interest, maybe cross-classifying gender and educational level and geographical with the geographical dimensions as well, identifying new domains of study corresponding to the places where people live that necessitate an application of model-based estimates, because the number of observations we have in the new domains are too few. And this a call for the integration of data coming from administrative data files. So data integration methods are, in the most of the cases, based on model-based inference, not design-based inference. And we had an acceleration towards the integration of smart data with interviewed data. So we know that the European Commission, Eurostat, is working towards the scenario where smart data and smart statistics are going to have an important role. And I think that this pandemic gave an acceleration towards this usage of smart devices in the current production of statistics. And this drives me to the reply to the your second question. Which deficiencies do we have now in measuring poverty? I think that we need to abandon the idea of having fixed sets of definitions of poverty. We need flexibility to be sure that no one will be left behind. And this is in the sense that we need to have flexibility in defining the domains of study, both with focus on geographical and not geographical domains. We need to know local indicators for the places where people live. And we need to pay attention to the definition of new vulnerabilities. Online teaching and online learning, yes, but is there an effect on educational poverty? Yes, it is. There is digital poverty, that is the inability to have access to digital services. And what about health poverty? So we need to define new vulnerabilities in order to take actions that aim to secure digital culture, healthcare access for marginalized communities also in developing countries, yes, but also in developed countries, that is also in Europe. And then the theme of dematerialization of the contact with the respondents opens for sure to modern antiques for persons I mean, quite used to the survey word. The Katie and Kiwi mode of data collection are not a novelty. They are tools of the 70s and 80s. But in any case, what we have understood for sure in Italy, that now we need to involve citizens in the data collection process. This is to improve response rates. We have the case of the Italian seroprevalence survey. In the times of the COVID pandemic, Istat and the Ministry of Health in Italy carried out this survey, but the participation rate was not so high. So according to me, we need for a new statistical literacy, and we need also to involve citizens in data collection, asking for their cooperation, because there is a sort of, I would say, a crisis of social surveys with not so high response rates, and this requires methodological efforts, that is strengthening estimation methods for sure, but we need also a sort of new epistemology of official statistics, in which the design of the surveys is coordinated between the different subjects as citizens. I would say that we can also learn from citizen science. So coming to the last question, the allocation of funds. Okay, I agree with Rudy. Our PEAs are linked to the country reports. These are based on monitoring. So we need to use monitoring at country level in order to be sure that data on poverty are present in the planning and in the allocation of funds. So according to me, the Europe will be greener, more resilient, better fit for the current and forthcoming challenges as this recovery plan, Next Generation Europe call, but only if we will be able to conceive and do actions that aims to secure digital culture, healthcare access with a local perspective, and so using data indicators and obviously data indicators to give light on poverty situations and to give light also on inequality, because absolute poverty is only a part of the general problem of redistribution of income and of inequalities. Also, educational poverty is a very important issue. And I would say that we should not put aside the issue that we need to have data on the transmission ways of this virus. This is because we are living difficult times, but and we hope that these difficult times are coming to an end. But in any case, we need to learn from the experience, and we need to take into consideration that maybe sometimes transmissions is linked to social behaviors, and that the behaviors and the availability of masks or other tools to protect ourselves and themselves and the others, these are closely linked to situations of marginalization and poverty, and that we need data also on this. And finally, I think that poverty data should be considered as a sort of general setting where we have the key to understanding and also to explain the context in which the spread of the virus takes place. And I think that finally, we need to enhance the informative power of data on poverty as a social indicator. And in this, I think that we need to improve the social scoreboard. And also to enhance the concept of poverty with information also on the ability to understand public health information. That's important. And this is why at the end of the talk and at the end of the day, I am envisioning that we need a redesign of data collection process involving citizens in a participatory active way, more participatory active way. In this, I think that the movement known as citizen science can help and will help us. So many thanks, and I hope to have been in the time.
Many thanks, Monica. You brought a number of issues. I take two main messages from you. The need to improve data collection through surveys and more participatory process. I think the gathering information and the right information from all those concerned is key. The second message that I take is to enlarge and extend the concept of poverty in order to include, for instance, educational, digital, or health. It's not just about income. And in fact, this is also something that came up in the discussion in the last 2 days. You also mentioned absolute poverty basket, and I think absolute poverty is the topic of the pilot project of the GSC. So in this sense, I have nice transition towards Balint. Let's see if now the audio works well.
Let's give it another try.
It works.
Does it work now? Great.
Yes, please.
Thank you, and sorry everyone for the technical glitch. Thank you, Cynthia, for the kind words, the introduction, and also for the invitation. Most importantly, it's a great pleasure to participate at this discussion and to be able to share with you some of the interesting insights of our work, and also to learn from the others about the broader context of our work. Let me try to share my presentation. Have I succeeded in doing so? Great. So indeed, I will be talking to you as the coordinator of this JRC project aimed at measuring and monitoring absolute poverty in the EU. I will focus mostly on the general aims, measurement strategies, expected outcomes of this project. The COVID-related aspects will not be readily visible, but I will try to make a few connections towards the end of my presentation. So let's, without further ado, let's start. A few words on the project itself. So it's a joint cooperation between DG Employment and the Joint Research Center where I work that started a little bit more than 2 years ago. And the project runs until August 2021. And we are working very hard on the preparation of the final report to be submitted by June. The project core team includes 2.5 full-time equivalent JRC researchers, but we are not alone. We are supported by a large number of experts and other parties. The main stakeholders of the project are an inter-service steering group, which guarantees within Commission communication and flow of information. We have an advisory board of distinguished scientific members, policy experts, and anti-poverty advocates. We have national expert teams working for us on the field. We have external consultants and data providers, and we are obviously in close contact with Eurostat and the National Statistical Institutes. The main project objectives are as follows. So we are mandated to conduct empirical analysis and collect new data to contextualize the AROPI indicators, the main indicators used for poverty measurement currently. We have to design, develop, and pilot an absolute poverty measure that is scalable to all EU countries. And absolute poverty in this case doesn't mean extreme poverty or abject poverty. It means that the poverty measure is defined on the grounds of minimum needs of individuals and households, irrespective of relative or distributional considerations. The third objective is to create an implementation guideline to make recommendations as to how these APSPO measures could be scaled up at the EU level and could be used for regular monitoring use. So what is the context in which we operate? Basically, it is by the Europe 2020 set of indicators, which are a composite set of indicators that measure essentially population share at the risk of poverty and social exclusion. The three main components are the at-risk of poverty rate, the so-called AROP rate, which is a simple, transparent, easy to calculate monetary measure of relative poverty at the national level. Many would argue, and I think rightly so, that it's more of a measure of inequality than poverty. And as such, it has various problems as far as cross-country and within-country comparability are concerned. It doesn't provide a fixed threshold to be used as a reference point over time, and it's certainly not scalable. What you get as a poverty measure depends on the set of population or the population focus that you employ. The second component is the set of material deprivation indicators. They are needs-based. They represent fixed absolute thresholds of material deprivation and social exclusion. Their main limitation concerns their non-monetary character, which makes it hard to attach clear policy actions and to it. So it has limited actionability, and it represents a very low targeted living standards in many countries. I checked, and half of the EU countries for 2018 have a population share below 5% that is considered materially deprived. The third component is very low work intensity, an indirect proxy for income deprivation. This is also non-monetary, lack the behavioral foundations, so we don't distinguish between those who are inactive on a voluntary basis from those who are involuntarily out of work. And our calculations show that there's an increasing disconnect between work intensity and income poverty, most likely due to the polarization of wages and the fact that many job holders earn very little, not enough to generate enough income. So if you have good pattern recognition skills, you may already notice that there is scope for a complementary indicator that mixes the absolute character of material deprivation indicators and the monetary character and actionable feature of the AROP rate. And this is how the APSPO project comes into play. The main conceptual challenge that we face is how to meet the conflicting requirements of having an absolute threshold, an absolute cutoff that is both valid at the local level and also cross-country comparable. If you choose a single value, you may ensure cross-country comparability, but you lose out on local validity. If you allow for too much local consideration, then the very objective of cross-country comparability gets compromised. So our proposed solution depends or follows the capabilities approach developed by Amartya Sen and Marta Nussbaum, whereby we predefine a standard of living in very generic terms, for example, adequate social participation, and then try to think through the individual and household level capabilities and social roles that we want this poverty line to correspond to. And then once we have these are common and fixed across countries, then the minimum needs themselves can be bagged out in a context-specific way, whereby local characteristics, country level differences are taken into account. If one also pays attention to differences in living costs, then even if minimum needs are actually the same, one can arrive at poverty lines that differ along very many margins within countries and even for the particular regions or geographical areas based on household and individual characteristics. Regarding the measurement strategies that we employed, I would need to start with stating the dual character of the project. On the one hand, this is an applied project. We need to derive poverty measures that are applicable to all EU countries. On the other hand, it's an explorative research. Why? Because absolute poverty measurement is really not being used in Europe. Italy is the only country where ISTA, the National Statistical Office, carries out absolute-based poverty measurement for a long time. Other bits and pieces exist in other countries, but really, once we get to the challenge of having a cross-country comparable indicator, we are simply blazing new trail and we are covering new ground. So to meet these requirements, we proposed 3 different modeling strategies. We call them extended, pragmatic, and direct approaches. These strategies have a lot in common. They also have significant differences. The common element is that they all foresee modular measurement by pre-established expenditure categories. You see them in the columns. And they all mix reference budget practices, the use of illustrative priced basket of goods and services, with statistical methods based on survey data. The extended approach is the one that relies most heavily on reference budget. We in fact use existing budgets developed by the Herman Delac Center at the University of Antwerp, most notably for food and residual expenditures. The main challenge here is to ensure full population coverage, because these reference baskets and budgets are typically designed and produced for illustrative, well-defined, selected set of individuals and households. But for poverty measurement, we need a full population coverage. The pragmatic approach foresees thematic measurement of expenditure threshold by expenditure category. This is most closely following the approach used by ISTAT for Italy. The crucial challenge here is to find the right set of data that we can use to define minimum needs in a cross-country comparable way. For example, ISTAT can rely on housing regulations in Italy to define minimum housing size. This we don't have at the EU level. National regulations are simply non-harmonized and very different, non-comparable, and EU level regulations are missing in many areas. The direct approach is the simplest one in some sense of all, because it simply takes a food budget and uses statistical methods to map directly from the food budget to the overall poverty line. This is the method typically used in developing countries by the World Bank. The main issue with this approach is that we have to come up with a new methodology for this mapping, because the ones that are used in developing countries, characterized by high food expenditure shares, are not working in rich countries where the expenditure share of food is rather low. So there are some methodological improvements needed on this front. This is the data universe of the project. It shows what kinds of data we use in each major phase of the measurement process, from the reference baskets to pricing them to statistical modeling using survey data, and eventually to measure headline poverty indicators. You see that we use a lot of different data sources. You also see that we have the ability to make comparisons, to compare different reference baskets, to compare different price information, and thereby learn a great deal about their applicability, their strengths and weaknesses, and importantly, the sensitivity of the resulting poverty lines to these methodological choices and data sources. What a great issue that we face is that the sporadic absolute poverty type estimates, living cost estimates, are all based on different sources, and it's very hard to compare them cross-sectionally. We will learn a great deal about that in this project. You also see that we produce a considerable amount of new data. These are the ones that are illustrated by darker shaded boxes. We produce new nutritional food baskets that are truly comparable across countries. We collect prices at the local level, and we use household scanner data to learn new information and collect prices in in unconventional ways. The expected results and contributions of the project is, first of all, we are working towards producing a set of absolute poverty lines for all EU countries. By the direct approach, we will have multiple variants of these for selected countries, Belgium, Finland, Hungary, and Italy. We will learn a great deal about poverty patterns in Europe. It's already expected to see rather high absolute poverty rates in poorer member states. We will most likely find that APSPO poverty is higher than ARO poverty in poorer member states, and the opposite relationship holds in richer member states. We will also most likely see that APSPO poverty rates are strongly correlated with material deprivation across countries. And in some sense, by some stretch of simplification, one could also imagine these APSPO poverty lines as a monetization of the material deprivation information content that we currently observe. And given that we can distinguish between various needs of individuals and households within countries, and given that we can take into account living cost differences within countries, it will also show in the modified horizontal poverty profiles that we derive. So the pockets and concentrations of poverty will be slightly different from the ones that can be observed with data currently at hand. Given the explorative nature of the project, we will also make significant methodological contributions for the practitioners and the scientific community in various ways. So the project started before the pandemic hit.
Balint, sorry to interrupt. Can you please wrap up?
Yes, I'm wrapping up. Okay, most of what I have to say has been presented better and in more detail by Rudy and Monica. I fully agree with what they said. We need to focus and highlight a broader view of poverty, focus on new dimensions, previously neglected dimensions, and we try our best to have these featured in APSPO. Our biggest contribution, though, I think, is to provide a framework that delivers cross-country comparable measurement and a fixed standard over time. And with this, I conclude. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you.
Many thanks, Balint. This was really interesting. I think that the project is super interesting. It actually made me think of something. Some 2 decades ago, it's a sign I'm getting old, I moved to Switzerland to start my PhD. So I was a TA at that time. And I was earning about 2,000 francs. So 2,000 francs is not bad. But even more than 20 years ago, I was below the poverty line in Switzerland. As a matter of fact, if I didn't have the health insurance from my home country, which I had an agreement with Switzerland, I wasn't able, no way to get access to the health system. And with those money, I wasn't able to get any place in an apartment. So the only way it was to have like a room in a residence for students. And this was not only my case. So in this sense, just to say that it's the conditions and the cost of life of the place where you are actually matters a lot in terms of determining poverty. So my situation was certainly not comparable to many others, but just to give a concrete example. I'm now moving to Matthias. So since we are a bit short of time, Matthias, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Cinzia. Thank you for inviting me. And I guess I will be a little bit complementary to what Rudy said, but indeed from the non-government perspective and a little bit more on policy. And very quick 2 remarks before I go into the questions. I will then focus on the question 2. Indeed, we have followed as ERPN for many years the European semester, and now the recovery resilience facility, and the new deliverables and timelines and procedures of the European cycle, semester cycle 2021, and also did with our members last year between May and July a COVID study focusing obviously on the impact of vulnerable groups and poor households. And as we all know, it's clear that the pandemic hit most or even stronger vulnerable groups and already poor households. If this is also, for example, single parents, or if these are people in precarious employment, or when it comes to questions of evictions, we cannot pay bills for heating and other issues, or as was mentioned at the beginning and by Monica, the digital exclusion from school. So all this is already covered, and we would expect that in the future this effect will even be stronger. So now I will go for the first question. How has the pandemic impacted the poverty monitoring in Europe? And it has been shown by others already. The first tentative answer is this is not yet fully clear on the basis of the data we have by now, because it has been said there is the time lag, and before we would have comparable the data now on the income situation, that will take still another year, both in the joint employment report 2021 or in the employment and social development in Europe 2020. We cannot yet grasp the COVID pandemic. Rudy has very well explained why. There is a slight difference for all the data that are on employment and working time, where we already have from the quarter 2 2020. So that's the first lockdown that is a little bit visible. And that also means, and Rudy has also more or less said it, there is, for us as Anti-Poverty Network, there is also a time lag before we would see now an increase in the demand of those that need social assistance or minimum income benefits. Before this becomes in a way visible or retraceable in the public administration or social security statistics. And it has been also mentioned by you. We had the introduction of emergency measures there that had a stabilizing effect on the labor market income, wages, salaries from short-term working schemes, or an extension of unemployment benefit, or other measures. We had obviously, and that's perhaps a good message, for at least those that are not in precarious employment and that are well covered by social protection schemes. We have very well in most countries workingly social protection schemes based on social contributions that now are first coming in with these emergency measures. So you don't see immediately numbers going up in social assistance benefits, and we had housing protection measures. So, and then indeed the Joint Research Center made, I think in this EU 2020 strategic foresight report that is linked to the semester, made an estimate, say that the poverty should go up by around 5% points to 125 million. But if there are these extra policies now, the emergency measures the member states have taken, then that might be mitigate, and it goes up by around 2%. So these are estimates by the Commission. The second question, has the crisis revealed deficiencies in measuring poverty in the EU? And for us, we would not see that there are special technical or methodological problems directly caused, but obviously there are the general challenges. As we see, we would need, and that has also said by Monica indirectly a lot, and by Rudy, we would need or aim to have data better broken down by sex, by age, by other economic variables, long-term unemployment, single parent, numerous families, person with disability, non-EU migrant, to make this. And obviously we are here with data experts. If we have longitudinal data or data that can show multiple disadvantages in households and needs, that would be much better. But we have the poverty monitoring tools that Rudy mentioned. We have the social scoreboard with the 14 headline indicators and about 20 secondary, and we have the social protection performance monitor. And if we look into the social scoreboard analysis that is included in the Joint Employment Report 2020, there it's mentioned that the three most important challenges are gender employment gap, early school leaving, and then risk at poverty at exclusion rate. And that's mentioned that's critical or to be watched according to the scoreboard in 10 member states. And again, the issue is always around the the impact of social transfers on poverty reduction. And we have seen these, and Balint mentioned this, the headline indicators and secondary indicators that are there. For us, it's also important, and that's again the call to have more, Monica also said it, Rudy, in a way, more detailed information on certain vulnerable groups. In the secondary indicators, there is at least severe housing deprivation. That's also important, or out-of-pocket expenditure for healthcare. That gives you some ideas. And we as ERPN have exactly asked that the social scoreboard is complemented existing by indicators on more that cover better extreme poverty, homelessness, in-work poverty, adequacy of social protection, and child poverty. So we have already seen the social protection monitor, so I don't talk about this, but also there you would have, and that's good in a way, you have the relative poverty risk gap rate, or you have the child poverty rate there, or the in-work risk of poverty. So this would help now to see what would be the target of policies to go beyond the COVID crisis. And again, if we look into the annual sustainable growth strategy to joint employment reports of the last 2 years, then we have, and I can show very quickly only this this graph here, and keep it for a little bit, and you all know this. We know that obviously we are far off in a way the Europe 2020 strategy target of -20 million, but there is a clear decline in a way over the years, but this is all pre-COVID of these different categories that also Balint mentioned, the AROP, the severe material deprivation, the quasi-job loss household issue, that there's very clear decline in this anyway. But we are still, normally it should have gone down to 96 million, it's written here, and we were with the UK still at 110 and now million. So there is a big difference, but we see a clear, where the challenge comes, or the change comes, the positive change comes from, as we see, is from clear reduction of rates and levels of severe material deprivation, and also of the other, especially in Central Eastern Europe. But still, and that's now again for the post-COVID time, that said in both joint employment reports 2020 to 21, particularly high risks for children, persons with disabilities, migrants, for example. So we would need to have data to follow up on this, and still social transfers are not performing sufficiently well to reduce poverty in a number of countries, as well as in-work poverty. And so these are some illustrations for where we could go in a way, also saying that highlighting the role of minimum income schemes and problems around adequacy there in a way. So to illustrate where we could go in the future, where we would need to focus. And it has been mentioned by Balint, we would need a mix between a sort of relative poverty approach and an absolute poverty approach, because poverty is multidimensional. Deprivations are not only related to income, but also to questions access to quality or to inclusive education, to healthcare, to integration, family support, resident status. So you need to cover this also. And so we support, obviously, focus on a fixed standard of poverty. If, as Monica has said, the citizens, those concerned by poverty, are also included in defining what are these baskets of good, these reference baskets. But obviously, we also need, very importantly, a relative approach to measuring poverty, because then we can, this is the link, obviously, to the relative wealth and the changes of relative wealth and income in a society. So I go now, because I know time is running, to the third question. And then I can stop here this sharing, because it was for illustrative purposes. The third question is, how can now the poverty monitoring contribute to drive the fund allocation? That's why I mentioned that we have been working on this. So still in the country-specific recommendations in 2019 and 2020, poverty and poverty reduction stayed a clear focus. And as has been mentioned by Monica and by Rudy, in the recovery resilience plans now the member states have to deliver, they have to react to these country-specific recommendations. So we had 14 that have a focus on poverty reduction or income support or access to services. We had in 2020, before we had in 2019 around 16 country-specific recommendations having this angle. But only, for example, Latvia, there is, in the last year, it was explicitly mentioned to improve the effectiveness of the tax benefit system to protect against poverty. But the change in 2020 to compare to 2019, and that's a little bit worrying if we look to the post-COVID, is that there already in the country-specific recommendations, we had less focus on specific target groups. And we have seen that specific vulnerable groups are particularly hit by COVID. We had a lot of recommendations, also quite some on minimum income. So to conclude now, we have in this year's cycle, we have no country-specific recommendations, but those of 2019 and 2020 should still be used, should guide. That's also written, as Rudy has said, in the guidance the Commission has issued for the recovery resilience plans to the member states, that they should report on this, and that they have to show that the reforms and the investments implement these country-specific recommendations that have a certain focus on poverty reduction, on minimum income, on access to services. And my last reflection would then be what we can do in the post-COVID phase on the data level. Indeed, what we would need better broken, better disaggregated data, also on to be able to better tailor the economic and social support measures for specific vulnerable groups. We have mentioned them, and to counter the increased income inequalities. So it's about single mothers, or if it's about persons with disability, homeless people, migrant, Roma, and so on. We have a persistently higher risk for these groups. We have a lack of adequacy or poverty reduction in many countries of the social protection schemes, but still not enough focus in the countries' recommendations on this target group. So what would need to be happen is a better monitoring of the additional effects of the COVID pandemic on these specific groups, and of in-work poverty, but has been said by colleagues also on, for example, this new risk of digital inclusion from access to administration and education, and clearly a more gender-sensitive analysis, because we see that is also one question I saw, that women are more concerned for different reasons by the risks that also come with COVID in a way, and that we get in a way a concentration of the poverty policy efforts on those exposed for longer phases, long-term unemployment, homelessness, other forms of precarious labor, in forms of severe material deprivation. So that would be our advice in a way to how to improve the data monitoring, the policy monitoring, and to learn from the COVID pandemic. If we look to what are the current processes, what are the current data, how they are used, the scoreboard, the social protection, performance monitoring in the European semester, and what could be improved there. So I keep it for there.
Many thanks, Matthias. We are already running out of time. I would like to take just 2 minutes, maybe to take one question, because there are a number of questions in the chat. Balint was very nice and already replied to a couple of them. Let me just take one. So there was one very patient person who asked the question a long time ago. So it's this is for Rudy, and that is the first question. Could you give us a concrete example of necessary improvement in the indicators? Rudy, if you can quickly respond, and then we close.
Can I have 10 minutes? Because there are a lot of gaps which I could mention here. No, but seriously, there are a number of issues which have already been mentioned by my colleague speakers here. You have different access to healthcare, access to long-term care, and the out-of-pocket issues which are related to that. There is the issues of very vulnerable groups. Matthias mentioned immigrants. We only managed to measure that very partially and in a statistically not so solid way. Other groups like that. But I would like to, there is also the issue of the digital divide, which is a very upcoming question. But I would like to add one more, I think, very crucial issue, and that is related to the other acts of the New Generation EU Pact, and that is the green transition and the distributed distributive impacts of that. Because I think this green transition can only succeed if everybody is on board and no one is left behind, and we do not have a conceptualization of the relation between the green transition and the inclusiveness of that. So that is lacking, and we consequently, we don't have the indicators to measure that. I think this is really crucial for poverty policies, but also for the success of the green transition in se. So this would be my very brief answer to that. There are a lot of data gaps, and it's a very difficult issue because the resources of the member states to invest in additional data sources are very scarce, and they are not very willing to do that. So it's a really difficult issue, but I think we've come to a point. ISG has pointing to the gaps in the monitoring capacities already over the last decade, I would say, but we're not making very much progress in this. But with this new situation of the digital and the green, I think we really come to a point that we really need to reflect well on additional data collection. I think administrative data can be there a source, more going to use of administrative data across member states. But I think we also need to reflect on at least one additional data collection on which covers a few of these issues. I would leave it with that.
Many thanks, Rudy. I think this was actually a very nice compliment to everything that it was said earlier. I need to apologize to those who asked questions. I regret, but really need to close the meeting. I want to thank very much all the panelists for your very insightful contributions. I think it was extremely interesting and extremely complimentary. I wish you good luck with your work, and I hope to see you again. We're actually having another spring school this time in a few months, still on poverty, but focusing more on the policy meaning and the policy dimension. So we will keep you informed. Many thanks to all, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.